It was almost midnight in a quiet suburban home in Seattle. The rain tapped gently against the window, and the world outside had fallen asleep. Laura Bennett lay in bed, staring at the soft glow of her bedside lamp. The day had been long work, chores, calls, and then the silence that came with being alone again. Her husband, Richard, was away on another business trip, something that had become so normal she barely questioned it anymore. But that night, as she turned off the light and pulled the blanket up, something in her chest felt heavier than usual, like an invisible hand pressing on her heart. Just as she was drifting off, a soft knock echoed through the stillness. It wasn't loud, but enough to jolt her upright. For a second, she thought she imagined it. Then came another knock. Gentle but urgent, Mom. It was her son, Ethan. His voice was low, uncertain. Laura quickly turned the light back on and sat up. Ethan, what's wrong? It's so late. The door creaked open and Ethan stepped inside. He was 22 tall and usually calm, but tonight something was off. His eyes looked restless, his face pale as if he'd been holding something in for too long. He hesitated by the door, his hands buried in his hoodie pocket, his gaze shifting away from hers. Laura's heart started to race. Sweetheart, what is it? You're scaring me. He took a deep breath. Mom, there's something I need to tell you, and I hate that I'm the one saying it. The air in the room seemed to stop moving. Laura could hear the rain again, steady and rhythmic, like a heartbeat in the silence. It's about Dad, he said finally. Laura blinked, trying to process. About your father. Did something happen? Ethan swallowed hard and nodded slightly. I saw him today, downtown. He wasn't at a meeting, Mom. He was with someone, a woman I've never seen before. Laura froze. The words didn't land all at once. They came in slow waves that hit harder each time. Are you sure? She whispered, almost afraid of the answer. Ethan nodded again, his voice trembling now. I'm sure. I didn't want to believe it either. I followed him because I thought it was weird. He said he was going to meet a client. But I saw him at that little cafe near Green Lake. He was sitting outside with her, laughing, holding her hand. The room felt smaller suddenly, the air heavier. Laura tried to steady her breathing, but her hands were shaking. She didn't know what to say. She didn't even know what to think. Ethan quickly continued, his eyes filled with guilt. I didn't want to come here and tell you this. I sat in my car for an hour trying to figure out what to do. But I couldn't sleep, and I couldn't lie to you. Laura pressed her hand to her forehead, feeling the warmth of tears threatening to fall. You did the right thing, she whispered. You should never keep something like that from me. Her voice was calm, but inside a storm had started. She wanted to scream, cry, or call Richard that very second, but she didn't. Instead, she just stared at the floor, her mind replaying the past few months like a slideshow. The late meetings, the extra trips, the distracted tone when he answered her calls. She remembered asking him once if everything was okay, and he smiled that tired smile of his and said, just work stress. She believed him. She wanted to believe him. Now, that belief felt like glass shattering quietly in her chest. Ethan stepped closer. Mom, are you okay? Laura forced a faint smile, even though her throat felt tight. I will be, she said softly. You did the right thing, Ethan. You don't have to worry. He hesitated, unsure if he should leave. I just didn't want you to find out later and think I kept it from you. Laura reached out and touched his hand. Thank you for being honest with me. Go get some sleep, okay? I'll be fine. He nodded reluctantly, gave her one last worried look, and walked out, closing the door gently behind him. The silence returned, but it wasn't peaceful anymore. It was heavy, cold. Laura sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the door. She felt her world tilting slightly, like the ground had shifted under her feet. The man she had trusted for 25 years, the one she built her life around, raised a family with, might have betrayed her. She stood up and walked to the window. The rain had stopped, leaving drops clinging to the glass like tears. The streetlight outside cast a faint golden glow over the driveway where Richard's car usually sat. It wasn't there tonight. He was supposed to be 2 cities away at a corporate conference. But now even that seemed uncertain. Her mind spiraled back to all the small signs she'd ignored: the new cologne, the sudden interest in working out. The secretive texts, he said, were from the office. She had told herself not to overthink, that marriage had its quiet seasons. But maybe she realized it wasn't a quiet season. Maybe it was a slow goodbye she hadn't noticed happening. Laura walked back to bed and sat down again, staring at her reflection in the mirror across the room. Her face looked tired, older than she remembered. "Why didn't you just tell me, Richard?" she whispered to the empty room. For a long moment, she sat there in silence, tears slipping down quietly. But then she wiped them away. There was pain, yes, but also clarity. If this was the truth, she needed to face it head on. She looked at the clock, 12:47 a.m. The night felt endless. But her thoughts were now sharp and steady. Tomorrow, she decided she would call him. Not to accuse, but to ask. To hear his voice, to see if the truth would come through it. Laura took a deep breath and turned off the light again. The room fell back into darkness, but she didn't close her eyes. She lay there, listening to the faint sound of wind brushing against the window. The peace she had known was gone, replaced by a strange kind of courage she didn't realize she had. She wasn't sure what tomorrow would bring, but she knew one thing for certain: her life had just changed, and nothing would ever be the same again. And somewhere in the quiet darkness, as she stared into the ceiling, her heart whispered the words she couldn't say aloud. "Please, Richard, let it not be true." The next morning came with pale sunlight slipping through the curtains. Laura hadn't slept much. Her mind replayed Ethan's words again and again, each time cutting a little deeper. She made coffee, though she could barely taste it. Everything felt dull, unreal. The kitchen looked the same, the family photos. The vase of half-wilted flowers, but something inside her had changed overnight. When Ethan came downstairs, his face showed the same worry from the night before. "Mom, are you sure you're okay?" he asked gently. Laura nodded, trying to sound steady. "I'll be fine, honey. I just need some time to think." She gave him a small smile, though it didn't reach her eyes. She didn't want him to see how much her heart hurt. Ethan left for the day to meet friends, and once the door closed, the quiet filled the house again. Laura sat at the kitchen table with her phone in her hand. She wanted to call Richard, but stopped herself. She wasn't ready, not yet. She needed to be calm to understand what she was even going to say. Instead, she opened her laptop and logged into the family's shared bank account. She never used to check it much, but today, curiosity and fear guided her fingers. Within minutes, she noticed something strange: charges from hotels she didn't recognize. 2 weekends in Portland, 1 in Tacoma. Richard had told her those were team meetings or client workshops. But seeing them there in black and white made her stomach twist. She kept scrolling. And one detail caught her breath: a jewelry store charge from last month. She hadn't received any new jewelry. That somehow hurt the most. Laura leaned back, covering her mouth as a tear slipped out. The signs had always been there, but she had brushed them aside because love often makes you believe the best, even when the truth is whispering right in front of you. She stood up and began pacing. Memories came flooding in the way Richard's phone always stayed face down. Distracted smiles at dinner, the moments when he'd look at her but seem miles away. For months, she thought the problem was her. Maybe she'd become too distant, too busy, too ordinary. Now she realized she wasn't the one who drifted. By late afternoon, Laura decided to drive to Green Lake, the place Ethan said he'd seen Richard. It was a quiet area with small shops, cafes, and couples walking along the water. She parked nearby and sat in the car for a while, staring at the cafe across the street. She imagined Richard sitting there with another woman, laughing easily, probably looking like the man she once knew so well. She didn't cry this time. She just watched, feeling the reality sink in. It wasn't a movie or a nightmare. It was her life. When she finally drove home, the sun was setting, painting the sky in soft pink and gold. It should have been beautiful, but all she saw was the ending of something. She walked inside and sat on the couch, clutching a photo frame of their wedding day. They had looked so young, so full of hope. She remembered how Richard had whispered to her during their first dance. "No matter what happens, it's you and me against the world." That promise now felt like an echo. Later that evening, Ethan returned home. He sat beside her quietly for a moment before speaking. "Did you call him?" Laura shook her head. "Not yet. I need to be sure before I say anything." Ethan frowned. "Mom, you don't need more proof. You already know," she sighed. "Knowing and accepting are two different things. Ethan, sometimes the heart takes longer to catch up to the truth." He nodded, and they sat together in silence. It was strange how something so painful could bring them closer. Laura realized how grown up her son had become, protective and more aware than she'd ever given him credit for. That night, when Ethan went to bed, Laura stayed awake again. She opened her drawer and pulled out old letters. Richard had written years ago notes he'd leave on the fridge or in her purse when they were newly married. "Can't wait to see you tonight. You make every day better. Love you always." She read them slowly, one by one, until tears blurred the words. Somewhere along the way, those small gestures had stopped. Her phone buzzed suddenly, making her jump. It was a message from Richard. "Flights delayed. Be home tomorrow evening. Miss you." Laura stared at the screen, feeling a strange mix of sadness and anger. How could he type those words so easily while living a lie? She didn't respond. She set the phone aside and walked to the window, looking at the moonlight spilling across the backyard. The swing Ethan used to play on still creaked in the breeze. It reminded her that life keeps moving even when your heart feels stuck. She thought about calling her sister, maybe sharing what she'd learned. But she stopped herself. This wasn't gossip, it was her marriage, her family, her heartbreak. And right now, she needed silence more than advice. By morning, she felt calmer. Not happy, but more focused. She brewed coffee, opened the windows, and let the fresh air in. The house still smelled like his cologne, his presence, but she tried not to let it hurt. Instead, she made a decision. When Richard came home, she would ask him directly. No shouting, no drama, just the truth. To distract herself, she cleaned, organized, and even cooked dinner, though she wasn't sure if he'd be home in time. She moved quickly, keeping her hands busy because stillness brought back the pain. By evening, she sat at the dining table, watching the light fade again. Ethan was in his room, probably studying or pretending not to worry. Laura kept glancing at the clock, counting the hours until Richard would walk through that door. Each minute felt like a lifetime. Her mind swung between anger and heartbreak. Part of her wanted to believe there was a misunderstanding, that maybe Ethan had seen something innocent. But another part, the quiet, honest part, knew better. She thought about their marriage, how it had started with laughter, road trips, and shared dreams. Somewhere in the chaos of jobs, responsibilities, and years passing too quickly, they had lost each other. Maybe Richard had gone searching for something he missed, a spark, a feeling. But he'd forgotten that the woman who once gave him everything was still waiting at home, hoping he'd notice she was lonely too. When the clock struck 10, she stood up and walked to her bedroom. She looked in the mirror one last time and whispered to herself, "Tomorrow, I find out the truth, no matter what it is." As she turned off the light, she felt both fear and strength rise inside her. The fear of losing the life she had known, and the strength to face whatever came next. For now, that was enough. Outside, the rain began again, soft, steady, cleansing. Laura lay down and listened, her eyes open in the dark. The truth was close now, and deep down, she was ready to face it. The next evening, the sound of a car pulling into the driveway made Laura's heart race. She stood near the kitchen counter, her hands resting on the edge for balance. The house was quiet except for the ticking of the clock. Ethan was at a friend's place, and for the first time in days, Laura was alone waiting for Richard to come home. She didn't know what to expect. Lies, excuses, or maybe the truth. But she knew one thing tonight. Things couldn't stay hidden anymore. The door opened, and Richard walked in with his usual calm smile. "Hey, honey," he said, setting his suitcase down. "Long day. I missed you." His voice was smooth. Practiced. Laura watched him carefully. "You made it back early," she said softly. He nodded, loosening his tie. Yeah, the flight finally went through. Traffic was awful, though. She forced a small smile. You must be tired. Exhausted, he said, walking toward her. How have things been here? Quiet, she replied, her tone steady. Almost too quiet. Richard paused, sensing something off in her voice. You okay? Laura took a deep breath. The moment she had rehearsed all day was finally here. Actually, there's something I need to ask you. He frowned slightly. What's going on? She looked straight at him. Were you really on a business trip this week? He blinked, caught off guard. Of course I was. Why? She stepped closer, her voice calm but cutting. Because Ethan saw you 2 days ago. At Green Lake. You weren't alone. The color drained from his face. For a moment, neither spoke. The silence stretched, heavy and electric. Laura, he said finally, his tone slow and cautious. I can explain. She shook her head. Don't, please, just tell me the truth. Who is she? He looked down, rubbing his forehead, his breath unsteady. It's not what you think. It's exactly what I think, she said sharply, then steadied herself. You've been distant for months. Late nights, fake meetings, empty excuses. I wanted to believe you, Richard. I really did. But you made it impossible. He sighed deeply and sat down on the couch, his shoulders heavy. Her name is Claire, he said finally. She works with me. It started after one of those long trips. We talked. We connected. I didn't plan for it, Laura. It just happened. The words pierced through her chest like glass. It just happened. She repeated softly, almost to herself. That's what people say when they stop fighting for what they already have. Richard looked up, guilt written all over his face. I never meant to hurt you. I swear, I didn't. I thought you didn't care anymore. We barely talked. You were always busy, always tired. She laughed bitterly. So that's your reason. You felt lonely, so you found someone else. Her voice trembled, but she refused to break. Do you know how many times I felt lonely too? I didn't go looking for another man, Richard. I stayed. I waited for you to look at me again. He looked away, shame flooding his face. I made a mistake. A huge one. Laura folded her arms, holding herself together. Does she know you're married? Yes, he said quietly. But it's over now. I ended it last week. That's the truth. Laura stared at him, unsure whether to believe it. You ended it because you felt guilty, not because you realized what you had. Richard stood up, his voice breaking. I still love you, Laura. I never stopped. She shook her head, tears filling her eyes. Love isn't something you say to fix things. It's something you prove every single day, and you stopped proving it a long time ago. The room went silent again. The sound of the refrigerator humming in the background was the only reminder that time hadn't stopped. Richard stepped closer, lowering his voice. Please, just give me a chance to make this right. Laura met his eyes, and for the first time, she saw the man she used to love. Tired, flawed, human. But the trust between them was cracked, and no words could seal it instantly. She wiped a tear and spoke softly. I don't know if I can. I don't even know if I want to right now. I just need time. He nodded slowly, understanding. I'll give you that. Good, she whispered. Because I need to remember who I am outside of this marriage. Outside of your lies, Richard lowered his head. Do you want me to leave for a while? Yes, she said after a pause. I think that's best. He looked devastated but didn't argue. He went upstairs quietly, packed a small bag, and came back down. He stopped near the doorway, turning to her one last time. I really am sorry, Laura. I never stopped loving you. She didn't answer. She simply nodded, her face calm but her heart in chaos. When the door closed behind him, she let out a long, trembling breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. The house felt emptier than before, but there was also a strange sense of peace. The truth had hurt, but at least it was no longer hidden. Later that night, Ethan returned home. The moment he saw her face, he knew everything had come out. Did you talk to him? He asked quietly. She nodded. Yes, he admitted it. Ethan clenched his fists, anger flashing in his eyes. I can't believe he'd do that to you. Laura reached out, placing a hand on his arm. Don't hate him, Ethan. That kind of anger only burns us. He made his choices, and now I'll make mine. Ethan softened. So, what now? She sighed. I don't know yet, but I need space. I told him to leave for a while. Ethan nodded, proud of her strength even though he saw the pain behind her eyes. I'm here for you, Mom, whatever you need. She smiled faintly. I know, sweetheart. That's what keeps me standing. When Ethan went upstairs, Laura walked to the window. The night sky was dark, scattered with a few faint stars. She wrapped her arms around herself and let the cool air brush her face. Her heart hurt, but deep down she felt something new. Freedom. Not from her marriage, but from the uncertainty that had haunted her for months. The truth was painful, but it was also liberating. She looked at the reflection in the glass and whispered softly, You'll be okay, Laura. You always find a way. In that quiet moment, she made a silent promise to herself not to let this betrayal define her, but to let it remind her of her strength. Love had broken her once, but it would also teach her how to rebuild. Down the street, a car door shut, and she knew Richard was gone. For the first time in years, she felt the weight of her solitude, but also the beginning of her healing. The night was calm, the house silent, and in the stillness, Laura took her first deep breath of freedom. The days that followed Richard's departure were heavy, but strangely quiet, almost peaceful. Laura moved through her home with a new awareness, noticing things she had ignored before: the faint scent of coffee lingering from the morning, the way sunlight touched the living room just right, and the quiet hum of the refrigerator. Every small detail reminded her that life continued even when the heart felt broken. She kept busy with chores, organizing closets, sorting through old family photos, and even tackling projects she had postponed for months. She didn't want to think about Richard, but she couldn't ignore the emptiness his absence left behind. Ethan stayed close, sensing his mother's fragility without her having to say a word. He helped in small ways, bringing her tea, asking her to join him for short walks, and sometimes just sitting silently with her. His presence was a quiet anchor, reminding her that she wasn't alone. Laura felt grateful, though there was a twinge of sadness that he had to witness this family unraveling. She also realized how much he had grown in the last few years, carrying responsibility and empathy in a way that made her proud and a little envious. One evening, while the sky turned gold and pink, Laura sat on the porch wrapped in a warm blanket, sipping tea and watching the wind stir the trees. The house felt calm, almost like a sanctuary. For the first time in weeks, she wasn't consumed by anger or hurt. Instead, she felt reflective. She thought about her life, her choices, and her marriage. She thought about Richard's words, his apologies, and the betrayal that had pierced her heart. And yet she also felt a flicker of something stronger: hope. It wasn't the hope of immediately fixing the past, but hope that she could find herself again, rediscover the woman she was before the pain. Richard called a few days later. Hearing his voice was strange, soft, sincere, almost vulnerable. Laura, I'm sorry, he said. I've ended it. I don't expect forgiveness, but I hope someday we can talk again. Laura didn't respond immediately. She held the phone, listening to the quiet hum of the line and the distant sounds of the city. Maybe, she said finally, her voice calm but firm. Right now, I need time. I need to find myself again. She hung up, not in anger, but in resolve. It was time to focus on herself, on healing, on regaining her strength. Over the next few days, she took small steps toward rebuilding her life. She spent more time with Ethan, laughing with him over old jokes, helping him cook dinner, and even watching movies together like they had when he was younger. She reconnected with old friends, having long phone calls filled with shared memories and comforting conversations. Each interaction reminded her that the world was bigger than her heartbreak, that life could still hold joy even when it carried pain. One morning, she decided to revisit the places she and Richard had loved: the small cafe where they first met, the park where they had picnicked, the bookstore where they had spent hours browsing. Walking through these familiar spaces, she realized that the memories didn't have to hurt her anymore. They could exist as gentle reminders of the past, not chains holding her back. The streets were the same, the air fresh, and the people moved with purpose, unaffected by her private sorrow. And she found herself smiling softly, feeling a lightness she hadn't felt in months. Ethan noticed the change too. "Mom," he said one evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, "you're different now, stronger. You're happy again." Laura looked at him and smiled, reaching over to squeeze his hand. "I'm learning to be Ethan. I'm learning to be okay with who I am and what I've been through." She realized then that her strength wasn't about ignoring the pain, was about facing it, feeling it, and moving forward anyway. Weeks later, Richard returned for a short visit, giving Laura space to prepare herself. She met him at the door, calm, composed, and clear about her boundaries. "I'm glad you're back," she said softly. "But things can't go back to how they were. We need to be honest, even if it's painful." He nodded, looking down. "I understand. I just want a chance to show you I can be better." Laura let him in, but not completely. She maintained a careful distance, letting her heart guide her cautiously. They sat together at the kitchen table, drinking tea, speaking honestly about the past, their mistakes, and what they had learned. There was no anger, no yelling, only truth and reflection. And though it didn't erase the past, it opened a door for understanding. In the quiet moments, Laura realized that forgiveness wasn't about forgetting, it was about releasing the weight that held her down. She could forgive without pretending nothing happened. She could move forward without ignoring the hurt. And that realization gave her power she hadn't known she possessed. One night, as she tucked Ethan in, he hugged her tightly. "I'm glad you're okay, Mom," he whispered. She kissed his forehead, feeling the warmth of family and resilience. "Me too, Ethan. Me too." Later, Laura stood by the window, looking at the stars scattered across the night sky. She thought about her journey, the betrayal, the heartbreak, the long nights filled with uncertainty, and she felt a sense of peace. The pain had changed her, yes, but it hadn't broken her. She was stronger, wiser, and ready to face whatever came next. Her phone buzzed with a message from a friend, inviting her out for a coffee the next day. She smiled and replied, feeling a spark of excitement she hadn't felt in a long time. Life was moving forward slowly but surely. Laura realized that love, even when it faltered, taught her lessons that were invaluable. She learned how deeply she could feel, how much she could endure, and how strong she could become. The hurt had been sharp, but it had also been a guide, pointing her toward herself. In the following weeks, she began to explore personal projects, hobbies she had once loved, and even started journaling her thoughts. Each page was a step toward understanding, a way to process the past and embrace the present. She met friends for walks, reconnected with neighbors, and allowed herself moments of laughter again. Slowly, the house that had felt empty began to feel like home once more, not because of Richard's presence, but because of her own rediscovered strength. Ethan often joined her on the porch in the evenings. They would sit together, sipping tea, talking about life, or simply enjoying the quiet. Laura felt a deep sense of gratitude for the bond they shared. He had been her support, her confidant, and a reminder that even in the darkest times, love could remain pure and unbroken. One evening, she received a brief text from Richard. "I hope you are finding peace. I'm proud of you." She read it, paused, and smiled. She didn't feel anger, nor did she feel a rush to respond. She felt calm. She had survived the storm, and now she was free to chart her own path. Laura looked out the window again, feeling the night air cool against her skin. The stars above seemed brighter, the world more open, and her heart lighter than it had been in months. She had faced betrayal, confronted the truth, and discovered her own resilience. She whispered softly to herself, "I'm okay. I am stronger. I will be happy again." In that quiet moment, she understood that life didn't have to be defined by pain. The hardest endings could lead to new beginnings, and she was ready to embrace whatever came next. The house was no longer just a place of memories, it was a home filled with potential, hope, and healing. Laura knew the road ahead might not be simple, and the past wouldn't vanish, But she had reclaimed herself. She had the courage to face each day, the wisdom to protect her heart, and the strength to love herself first. The storm had passed, and in its wake, she found something more valuable than anything else: peace, clarity, and the knowledge that she could survive anything. And for the first time in a long while, she smiled fully, feeling the promise of tomorrow.